Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to our fourth Beyond the Couch webinar. This is Emotional Regulation in Uncertain Times with Susan McCormick, our founder. And I'm Kristen Staples. I'm the executive director here at the Wellness Connection. I just wanted to give you guys a few housekeeping items before we begin. First is that you can certainly use the chat button down below for any comments or saying hello, but please also put your questions in the Q&A. And I wanted to tell you some exciting announcements that we have happening here at the Wellness Connection. One of them is that we have just hired a new psychiatrist, Dr. Adam Mullet, who will be able to offer medication management if that's something that you need. We also have several of our therapists offering, accepting Anthem insurance, so that is helpful as well. And next week, Saturday the 19th, we are starting our farmers market, which is something we've been doing for like 15 years here at the Wellness Connection. It's at Stone Springs Hospital, and it's a great way to eat healthy and just have a nice community feel. Today, we are going to focus on emotional regulation in uncertain times. And I know this is something that we all need right now, but also all the time. And I'm excited to welcome Susan McCormick, our licensed family and marriage and family therapist and founder of the Wellness Connection, who's going to help us along in this subject. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Kristen. Okay, guys, so we are tackling a big topic today. I think when Kristen and Finn and Michelle and I sat down, and first of all, thank you, Kristen and Finn and Michelle, for getting this webinar going. We get better and better at them, which is kind of fun. This is our fifth one. We've been bringing to you topics like athletes and anxiety. We've been bringing to you things like energy work and how we utilize that in therapy. We've been bringing in art therapy and giving you practical tools that you can share with your family to use. I did one on manifesting the life that we all deserve. And of course, now we're tackling a big topic. And we weren't quite sure how we were going to do this, but we decided that we wanted to provide opportunities for people to kind of just talk about the elephant that's in the room, kind of, because we're all dealing with it. And as therapists, we get together once a month and we talk about cases that we're seeing and what we're seeing. And this is a prominent issue. And so we don't want to shy away from it. We kind of want to go straight into it. And we're kind of excited about it, actually. When I did my research and prepared, I took this topic very seriously. And I hope it's helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and get started because I could have probably made this presentation a 2-hour training when I was putting it together, and nobody wants that. So I'm gonna, if it feels like I'm rushing through things, we're gonna share with you this presentation. We're also videotaping. Actually, I should make sure. Yep, it says the meeting is being recorded. So we will send you a videotape of this as we're done. And if you have questions, just call us. You know, this is kind of our commitment to the community. We want to make sure that we're bringing to you content that has value, that it's helpful, and that it allows you to do a call to action, that you're able to do something from it. And that's our point today. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay. Share it. And then I've got to go over here and do that. All right. Look how fun this is. Hold on 1 second. I want to make sure I can see where I am so I'm not over my... Okay, that's where I am. Okay. So one of the top topics that we wanted to kind of tackle today was this whole thing of exploring how a lot of people are feeling, or at least when they're showing up into our offices, how they're feeling. And they're talking to me a lot about fear, a lot about fighting with family members. A lot of marriages are contemplating divorce because they can't tolerate the dysregulation in the home, about having different thoughts and ideas. So I want to kind of normalize it. I want to help you understand it. And then I want to just give you practical tools so that this is something that you can actually walk away with today, having a plan. Okay, well, and let's see, that didn't work when I went page down. Okay, so why are we here? Why are we in this dysregulated state that let me move over here so you guys can see. What we're noticing is that, I mean, we all know we're living in a pretty politically charged, polarizing space where there's a lot of things that feel uncertain. But the reality is some people are excited and some people are really frightened. So that's what's causing this divide. There's also this thing called constant news cycles, that's just giving us 7 by 24 information, and it has a tendency to really overstimulate us. And then when we get nervous, what do? We're seeking out more and more information, and we keep watching things over and over. We just got through with a pretty big election cycle, and what we typically see often is things like social unrest. We've been watching the marches and the different things happening, and there's a lot of emotion behind this. There's some global aspects to it. Back in the day, I kind of miss the days when I was a little girl with those big tube televisions and I had 3 stations. Well, no, I had 4, I guess. I had ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox. And I know there's a few of you on here that had that as well. But man, if you weren't sitting down at 5 o'clock or at the end of the day, you were missing the news that day. We just have so much access to not only information, but access to information that is quite alarming, and it goes beyond our borders. We have access to world news and what's happening there. And I don't think our brains were actually constructed to be able to handle that level of content. We also know that what is happening, what I can share with you, is that I don't know a person out there that doesn't have what we call unprocessed trauma. Some people have what we call little t traumas, and some people have really big T traumas. But the reality is if we have it and we haven't learned how to regulate it, the issue is that we don't know how to calm down our brain so that we can digest information, access rational thought, and then take appropriate action, right? And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And then when that happens, when we do get triggered, this thing called fear happens. And when that happens, it's almost impossible for us to think rationally, and it's impossible for us to stay grounded. The other thing that happens is that when we are dysregulated, often the space that we go to is either fight, flight, or freeze, right? And that's what we're seeing a lot. Either people are turning everything off and just having no concept of what is happening. That's safe, that's that notion of just being frozen. Then there's the fight. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that, right? And so it's just the state that we want to try and shift from. And then, of course, when all this is happening, what happens? But we, create what we call divisiveness. So when we feel overwhelmed, basically our brains, what they like is when we have predictability and safety. The issue is that the way that I get to predictability and safety is different than probably how Kristen does, or how Finn does, or how my husband who's on the call does, right? Our brains are neurologically wired completely different. The way that I feel safety is very different from others. And we just have to kind of understand that very truth with that. Uncertainty, as we just talked about, it either triggers fight, flight, or freeze, right? These bring about emotional manifestations that we're talking about with anxiety. It's why our phones are ringing, right? People are feeling really worried. They're feeling really restless over what is happening. It's causing a lot of irritability, not only within nuclear families, but to extended family. Like people are getting uninvited to graduations and parties and holidays. And this divide is just something that is just where people are, the only way that they can feel safe. We're also exhausted. I've got a lot of people coming in talking to me about just being purely exhausted, like the way that our body is in that perpetual state of fight, flight, or fright, or freeze, is that it really is pushing adrenaline and cortisol through our bodies at a constant state, and our body can't handle it. It's like you're running a marathon and you're not taking a rest, and your body is kind of giving you the finger. Sorry, that's, if any kids are watching, I'm sorry, but it's kind of getting tired of how we're treating it. So what we want to do is just recognize that this is happening, right? So when we look at what fear is, right? When we lack clarity, what happens? Our brain interprets it as if there's a threat. And it's like when our brain feels that there's a threat, it like just whoosh, it just shoots down adrenaline, cortisol, all those things into our body. And we get into that immediate place of having to take some pretty aggressive action to protect ourselves. What happens though is when we're in a space of fear, it narrows our perception and we get into what we call a survival based response. So we're just a bunch of people walking through our towns here, feeling like we are in survival mode. And when we do that, our brain actually limits its ability to solve real problems and give us real solutions. So what are we seeking? We're seeking control, certainty. And then when that happens, if we don't feel it, we tend to what we call cling to ideology or group identity. You probably see it. It's like, we hang out with people that look like us, sound like us, look, exercise like us, eat like us, whatever it is. Like we want to be around people where we feel comfort because they're like us. The problem is it limits our ability to kind of be open. So when we are in that place, it divides us, right? We know that that's happening. It turns us against them. We have this enemy image that we talked about, and it's amplified if you're dealing with any family of origin issues, if you've experienced any trauma. And I have to tell you, so many clients come in and they're like, childhood was pretty easy. I didn't really have any trauma. And I'm like, really? So as I start doing what we call genograms, or really looking at your family of origin and just how emotion was shared and how stress was handled and how if there were any numbing behaviors or if there was a high level of aggressiveness in the family, that's considered trauma. And I don't know many families that don't have some level of that. Even if your family was someone that never fought and never displayed any signs of any kind of emotion, that's considered trauma too. So what happens when we have unresolved trauma that hasn't been dealt with? Our brain is kind of like what I call an exposed nerve, right? So all of these reactions that we're having, being rooted in trauma, it makes us create what I call hypervigilance. So for those of you that are, oh, I don't have my phone. My son, my son has my phone in the other room. But if I had my phone, I would sit here and I would scroll, like that hypervigilance is like this need to know every second of every minute, has anything changed? Am I missing something? Am I up to date? Right? That hypervigilance is actually the root cause of so much of the discomfort that we're having. And then we respond to these stressors that are having with the intensity as if we're grabbing all the parts of us that have ever experienced difficulty that might relate to feeling fear. We go and we collect our 5-year-old and our 10-year-old and our 20-year-old. And all of those parts of us are in this almost combustible energy that just is really quite afraid, right? So I want to just kind of focus on 3 basic principles because I think these are important as it relates to our conversation today. One is this notion of the law of equifinality. And if you've never heard this, if you've ever been in therapy with me, you've probably heard it. Many of my clients have been hearing this phrase a lot from me these days. But equifinality is this whole notion that there are infinite possibilities for how you can solve a problem. To get from point A to point B, there is infinite possibilities. And who's to say what's the right one? Who's to say what's the right course of action? I grew up, well, my husband would tell you that I often tell him that it's mine, that's the right way. But you know what I mean, right? We're in this place where we often feel like our way is the only way and the proper way. Well, we believe that way because of how we were raised, experiences that we had, and the way that each of us feel anxiety is different and how we solve it is different. But I really need people to open up to this notion of equifinality, to be kind of open to say, wow, there's multiple ways to solve this. How are we going to remain regulated so that my prefrontal cortex works so that I can actually solve the problem? The other one that I think is very important that people hear me say a lot is this notion of the law of attraction. The law of attraction basically states that for whatever energy you put out into this world, it comes back to you in equal or greater force. I'm going to say that again because it's so important. What you're putting out to this world is coming back to you in equal or greater force. So when I get all revved up about whatever I'm revved up in, however I choose to handle that, if I'm putting negative energy into it, it ain't going to get it solved the way that I want to. It's got to come back. If I want it to come back to me, I've got to figure out how to put that energy in motion to actually solve problems. This other piece that I want people to understand that's important is this notion of numbing. Basically, we live in a world where we numb. We all know this, right? We have the phones, we have Amazon, we have Instagram, we have plastic surgery, we have, I don't know, we could sex, drugs, alcohol, the typical ones that we've always had. The bottom line is we are a society that numbs, and we've really got to figure out a way to get beyond that. And when we numb, our body is dysregulated and our focus gets very narrow. Our prefrontal cortex shuts down, and then we get into that fight, flight, I can never remember the three. I'll get it right by the end of this. And then the last thing I want to talk to you is this notion of regulation and why it's important. Regulation is important because when we're regulated, we have clarity. When we're regulated, we make good decisions. When we're regulated, we stay connected. When we're regulated, we are innovative. We are coming up with solutions that no one ever thought of. Like the best version of us using 100% of what our body's capable of is way better when we're regulated. When we're not, we kind of suck. That's just the bottom line. And I always use this analogy when you think of a lake, and it's so. I live on a lake, and I miss it. I go back in a week, but when I'm in the water, when I'm in the lake water, like I can tell when there's a storm or brewing because I can go under the water and there's sediment everywhere and there's all kinds of dirt and things, and I can't really see through the water with clarity. But after a storm passes and I get in the water, it's almost like all the sediment around me has just settled to the ground floor of the lake. And then I can see through the water with absolute clarity. Well, that's what our bodies need. Our bodies are filled with so much sediment and noise and conflict and visuals from our TV that we are just swimming in noise and we have zero clarity. So if we can just work towards this notion of regulation, I think you're going to see more solutions than problems. So let's just look at the brain. I'm looking at my watch to make sure I'm doing good on time. Because I like science, and I like the brain. I'm kind of a brain geek, if you think about it. But what we know is that if you're looking at this little I can't point. It doesn't let me. I was hoping I could point to my slides, but it doesn't let me. When we look at this picture, and you look at that little piece there called the amygdala, I have a joke in my house and here at the Wellness Connection. I keep saying, I want to get t-shirts that say, it's not me, it's my amygdala. What a geek shirt, I know. But it really is important because the amygdala is what activates that fight, flight, or freeze response, right? It's hyper-reactive when you have unprocessed trauma. And remember I said, there's not a human out there that doesn't have unprocessed trauma. And if you want to debate that, call me. I would love to talk to you about it. Or we'll talk about it in the Q&A. When that happens, when our amygdala is hyperreactive, what happens is that prefrontal cortex shuts down. And the reason that that's important is because the prefrontal cortex is where we have problem solving, empathy, right? It's where we can differentiate from what happened in the past to what is happening in the here and now. And if that is shut down, we will interpret something that is happening as a complete DEFCON 4 kind of, assault when it's just data. So the solution is we have to re-engage. We have to figure out how to re-engage the prefrontal cortex, right? Calm the amygdala and restore our ability to kind of respond instead of react. So when I look at the amygdala, we talked about what the function is, but with people that have trauma, the challenge is that the amygdala becomes hyperreactive when you've had it. It responds as if things like headlines and all this stuff were actual immediate dangers. And the result is minor stressors can feel overwhelming and the body reacts as though it's a crisis. And I love this visual because if you've ever watched Inside Out, which most people have, I have found, even adults and grandparents and all that good stuff, it's such a poignant film that helps us understand our parts. And if you've never watched it, go see it. But there's parts to joy, I'm sorry, to the young girl, and anger is one of her parts. And boy, when anger takes over, if you remember that one scene, I was going to share a video, but that seemed too technical for me. There's a moment where he just loses it and he just takes the panels and he puts them in high gear and he is ready to go to war, right? That is kind of where we are today. So now the prefrontal cortex is kind of where logic, reasoning, and regulation happens. And we talked about the function of it, but it's the important thing that it's not just good for being rational and logical. It's good because it's where we have empathy. And I hate to say it, but empathy is really important. And we're getting kind of away from that. And empathy means on both sides. I'm not talking one or the other. I'm saying empathy requires you to be a good listener, right? And when the amygdala is activated, that part of your brain shuts down. It's why we're not seeing it because nobody's operating from their prefrontal cortex, right? We literally lose access to be able to communicate effectively. So what we want to do, instead of responding with calm or compassion, which is when that's operating, we lash out, we shut down, we spiral into anxiety. And I think all of that probably sounds familiar to a lot of us. The hippocampus, this is important because it allows us to place experiences in past or present, right? It knows that this is where trauma really gets us, because if you think about a soldier that's been out to war and they come back and they hear a backfire of an engine and they hit the ground, their body believes that their hippocampus actually believes that they are back in the line of fire, right? And that's why their body responds as if it has to take protection. That's what's happening to us on a different scale, right? So trauma shrinks this and it just regulates the hippocampus, right? Which can allow us to kind of mix up whether this is a real threat or whether we're picking up something from the past. So this is why these things are important. So I know people saw this and they're like, whoa, you're going to talk about this? And yeah, because I love the dynamics of this country that we live in. I love that we have varying opinions. I love that we're not all alike, you know. In my family, I am different than my husband, than my son. We have three distinctly different personalities, three distinctly ways that we feel anxious, three distinctly ways that we problem solve. And we've learned over time with a lot of conflict and other maybe numbing behaviors, we figured out a way to function as a family. And that's what we have to figure out in our country right now, right? Just because we have different beliefs or different ways to solve problems, right? Go back to that equifinality. There's lots of different ways to solve this. And because of the way we were raised, some people align in one direction and the others in the other. The only reason we have these polar extremes is because people's needs aren't getting met and they don't know how to get them met. We can help you with that. Right. But when you look at people that are considered, you know, conservative, and this is beautiful, these households do really well, right? They emphasize structure, right? Roles are very clearly defined and they bank on things being predictable. They like things that are predictable. And that's true. I have a form that I share with couples. You know, it's why marriages struggle. It's like you're coming from completely different perspectives. You come and you have to make it work. And there are, I think I have 6 different ways in which we are just wired to be different, and we can't change it. These are unfixable problems. You know, they say that 70% of the uh, problems that couples face are just not solvable. Well, guess what? So is this. This is not a solvable problem. We just have to honor, oh, they feel better when there's predictability. They feel better with authority, right? It also looks on in there, the focus on individual responsibility is very important, right? Self-reliance, less focus on systemic kind of pieces of it. Self-reliance is key. Gender roles are more defined. There's a strong moral framework. You know, you can read through these, right? But sometimes emotion is not, oftentimes these families, and there's nothing wrong with this, families sometimes just don't show emotion, right? They learn to suppress it. And I'm saying that can go on both sides. From what I'm seeing clinically, this is not something that just aligns with one particular philosophical belief here. A lot of us have learned to really suppress emotion. And sometimes mental health is something that's not kind of sought after immediately. There's also a big focus on loyalty, right? To family, to country, to tradition. And there's sometimes clear lines between what's acceptable and what's not. And that structure is really quite healthy for some families, right? And how it works. But then when we compare it, right, to, sorry, there's something in my way here. I'm going to try and move it real quick. Oh, it won't move. So when we look at things like expression or people that are seen on the more liberal side, you know, this is families where they want you to express all your feelings, right? And that thoughts are meaningful and there's not, you know, there's an openness to express yourself. You know, it's not like hierarchy is more important often in more conservative families, and this is more kind of open-ended. Questioning authority is actually okay, right? The big focus in this particular group is emphasis on empathy and social justice, having flexibility in roles and shared powers, being curious, right? And this notion of vulnerability and mental health is something that's really embraced. Again, no right or wrong, just complete differences. So it kind of makes sense that when we go to, oops, this got stuck on me. It makes sense that when we go to college, we start realizing, holy moly, I thought all families were raised the way that I was. I've talked about it with so many friends. It's like, when did you first realize that there might have been something that wasn't quite like other families? And it was when we went to college. We realized that, oh my gosh, the way that my roommate interacts with her parents is quite different than the way that I do. The way that they manage conflict is different, right? So it makes sense why there is so much conflict. We're going, structure and authority versus expression and autonomy, personal responsibility versus empathy and social justice, traditional kind of norms with flexible kind of norms, right? It just makes sense why we have this divide. But again, back to equifinality, there's no right or wrong answer. And the key that we've got to do is try and figure out, how do we come in the middle, right? Because polarization on any extreme is never good. And again, I can have this debate, but I'm talking purely from science, from an emotional mental health perspective. What happens to the brain when we get polarized? What happens to your blood pressure, the amount of stress and chronic illness that comes as the result of polar extremes? I can give you lots of data for why it's not great, right? But we have to figure out a way to just respect that there is not a right way, but we have to figure out how to come together. So I didn't feel like I could do this due diligence if I didn't give time to talk about, what's been happening in the media. And I'm going to go through these slides really quickly because I don't think it's important to have a big debate. But what we do as therapists, what's really important to us is to make sure that we're dealing with real data. So when I have a couple that comes in and I'm doing marriage therapy, if I were to meet with a husband, I'm going to hear a story. And if I meet with a wife, I'm going to get a story that doesn't even sound like the same. It's like me and my sisters. If we talk about the Christmas of 1976, my experience is different from my sister Mary to my sister Beth. Like, it's almost like it's a completely different home and a completely different Christmas, because it's how our perception is. So here's what we know, right? And I think we all agree on this. At least what I'm hearing in my office. So if you guys disagree, let's talk about it. But what we know is that news is intended for clicks, right? They want to get people, they want to grab your attention, they want to pull you in, and they know that when they kind of make it, if they sensationalize it, it's more apt that you're going to come in. But we have to start critically evaluating this, right? Because we know that data is important. Sensationalization is not going to work, right? So what we want to make sure that we're looking at perception, because trauma, we know, is going to change that. We want to make sure that we're looking at data that provides clarity, revealing patterns, actual data that we can analyze. We want to make sure that when we use it clinically, it allows us to track progress, real data, numbers that are quantifiable, not quantifiable, that we can count it, right, is more important than the subjective kind of data. We want to encourage accountability and collaboration, and we want to reduce any bias that exists as the result of these really big stories that are really meant to just get an emotional reaction. So here's what happens to our brains with the news, right? Oftentimes it is activating our amygdala, which gets us into that mode that we talked about. That is going to activate fear, right? And it's going to shut down logic and empathy. Check, check. Then emotional regulation improves when the diet is stable. So when you think about it physically, when we put fruits and vegetables into our body and good sources of protein, and we balance our diet, right? And there's a lot of research to help us do that. We're getting better and better at that. Our body performs better. Well, the information that you're taking in allows your brain to work better. So that's why this input is so important, right? Balanced reporting, making sure that there's flexibility and open-mindedness. When we do that, we have a good diet for our brain that's going to allow us to make better decisions. So here's what we recommend: minimize bias and maximizing clarity, finding truly unbiased news sources, right? And then making sure that the polarization sites that are pulling us to them, or the social media, or the podcasters, or oh my gosh, there's so many things out there, overstimulation, right? That we want to make sure that we're not doing things that make us feel lousy afterwards. Like, just sometimes stop and be like, wow, my heart rate is going. And I'm guilty as charged. There's probably some of my friends on this that know that sometimes we get involved in these group chats, and then all of a sudden I'm like, ooh, I got to step out of there, right? Because it's not helping me. I can tell when my heart rate's going up or when I'm having a feeling, and I have to decide to back away and do things that are going to be helpful. So these are reputable, what we have found. I did some research on this, and this is what I came up with. If you have some, please share it in the comments, and we'll put after we do some research on it, we'll make sure that it kind of fits what we consider to be center or center right. These are some great sources, and it gives you information on why these are, what the bias is and what they're known for, so that you can make good decisions. This is more to the center to center left, places that you can find things. And I mean, I got to be honest, so many of these news sources are under attack right now too. And I think that we all have to be looking for hard data, and when possible, go to the original sources. I've decided I'm going to kind of go on and watch some of these hearings that are going on, because I want to hear both sides, and where I can make my own opinion versus having somebody make it for me. I don't want to do that anymore. And sometimes when I think about it, when you think about some of the, and I'm not even going to name them, we know who the big news agencies are that are out there. And believe it or not, I think somewhere between 67 and 69% for both parties get all their news from one place. You guys can guess who it is, right? So anyway, isn't that something? Like, the ones that are most sensationalized is where we get our information. So what I always recommend is making sure that you do your fact checking. You've probably been on some of those email, or not email, but Facebook or Instagram, where somebody posts something and then somebody says, oh, fact check, that's actually not true. Here's the link. And you're like, oh, okay, right? So before you go posting, make sure that what you're posting is accurate, and don't expect that if you're getting it from, many of these news agencies too consider themselves to be entertainment companies, not actual journalists, right? So just make sure that you've got good information. So here's best practices when it comes to news, right? Cross-check, what you're getting. Be mindful of things that are grabbing your attention. I go to it too. Listen, I am the pot calling the kettle black. I go like, oh, let me go into that. And don't forget the algorithms that are out there. People know where you align, and they are trying to pull you in. We call it fish hooking. It's like, it just pulls you into it so that they can keep you agitated, angry, those types of things. Follow original sources and raw data when possible, and just limit your time that you're on there. I was really proud of my son. He said that he has like a limit, and it literally turns him off when he's on there. So maybe we'll share some information on how to do that. So now I want to move on to the good part. What can we do about it? Like, that's just the framework. Now, what do we do about it? So here's the deal. Most of us are actually more alike than you think. It's my job as a couples therapist. My job is to bring couples in and to find out, it's the kind of like a Venn diagram. You've got three circles and you've got these outliers, but when you really look at what's in the center of that Venn diagram, there's so much more that we have in common. I think we can all agree that we want safety, we want connection, we want purpose in what we're doing. Many of us have the same shared values, honestly. And when we can really start to be curious and understand it, I think it helps to bridge those political and cultural divides. So what I want to do is help you find common ground, but it requires listening, not reacting. So I'm going to go into just a couple of strategies that we use quite a bit here at the Wellness Connection. And maybe Kristen and I will get creative and do some videos on each one of these so I can show you how to do it. But the first thing is to just start slowing down and giving yourself the opportunity to feel and observe where in your body you're feeling it. One of the things that we've learned with anxiety and dysregulation is that we as a society tend to live from like the neck up. Like, it's like a radar that's constantly paying attention, and then we're reacting, when our body is often giving us data and information that requires our attention, quite honestly. So sometimes if we can just stop, we read something, we stop, and we're like, oh, what am I feeling? And allowing ourselves to be with it and finding out where in our body we feel it. You can actually do, which is the next thing, box breathing to that particular area. I use it all the time in EMDR. And all my clients are like, oh, my neck hurts, I slept weird. And I'm like, okay, we're going to tap and breathe and get energy to that shoulder. And 100% of the time, the pain goes away. And they're always looking at me. And then they call me a voodoo doctor, but whatever, it works. That's all that matters, right? So just observing it, right? And putting energy there is helpful. Box breathing is a real common one. And there's so many apps out there. So if you're not doing anything that allows you to be mindful, oh my gosh, it's the cheap, it could put me out of business, honestly, right? So if we just learn to be mindful, we wouldn't have such a high demand for people like me. But box breathing, simple. You breathe in for a count of 4. So it goes, you breathe in, you hold it for a count of 4, you exhale for 4, and then you hold for 4. I mean, I just took a breath and I felt that just in that moment, just by doing that for you. Okay. You take 3 of those, and I can see my clients come in and their shoulders are up. And by that third breath, you just everything, face, shoulders, neck, body language just is so much more inviting. And then I want you to know that limit news and social media, right? It's just, you're being overloaded. It's too much data. I call it taking out the trash. Our bodies weren't intended for this much activity. And so just like you need to sometimes just take the trash out a couple times when it's full of debris and stuff that you don't want anymore, we need to do that to our brain. So mindfulness allows us to kind of step away. Bilateral stimulation is kind of a core foundational piece of EMDR, which is incredibly effective. The research says that talk therapy is somewhere around 50% effectiveness. And of course, there's some therapists that are better than others, and they probably have higher numbers. So you might have a really great one. I'm sure you do at the Wellness Connection, but EMDR, the outcome measures are in the 86th percentile. Like, we're talking almost double as effective, right? So it's the use of what we call bilateral stimulation. So I hope I'm going to walk back so you guys can see me. So it's basically, this is tapping. And you can Google tapping. You can get a million videos on YouTube or Google or wherever you do your searches. Instagram is covered with people that are teaching you how to tap. But bilateral stimulation is just about activating your left brain, because one of the things that we're talking, it's actually about activating your prefrontal cortex. Because when we're highly emotional, remember, the amygdala goes, "Wah!" and everything shuts down. So bilateral stimulation actually effectively calms down that amygdala so that your prefrontal cortex can really start working. So what happens when we've experienced trauma is usually it's a situate trauma, usually is when we're out of control. We can't control our surroundings. And so when that happens, our left brain immediately shuts down and we go into a very hyper aroused right trauma state, and then if we've never processed that trauma, our brain, every time it gets triggered by a similar emotion, our left brain automatically knows, I'm going behind the back and no one's going to be able to use me, right? Bilateral stimulation allows me to wake up that part of the brain. It allows me to calm the amygdala, open up the prefrontal cortex, so the brain realizes I'm not in danger anymore. I'm okay. I've got this. Containment is all about setting boundaries, stopping the ruminating, and sometimes I just give people the ability to just think about, creating a box. We use this in EMDR as well. And it could be anything. It can be a storage unit in your garage. It can be a jewelry box. It can be a suitcase. I mean, anything. But sometimes I just imagine when something's really bothering me that I walk up to that container and I open it. And I just decide, you know what, I need a break from this. I'm going to put it into the box or the container, whatever it is. And then I'm going to shut it. And then I imagine myself walking away from it. And every step that I'm imagining walking away from it, and I'm doing the deep box breathing as I'm doing this, it's magic. And you can ask thousands of my clients that have seen me when they do this, they're like, holy mackerel. I'm like, yeah, visualization is pretty powerful. So that's another tool that you can use. So here's the key. Mindfulness equals awareness, okay, versus reactivity. So this is old news. There's nothing exciting about this one other than it works, and I'm going to share some things with one of my new favorite therapists, Phil Stutz. He's got a book out there that I love, and he's got I think he's since passed. He had Parkinson's. And Jonah Hill, the comedian, did a documentary with him because he had such a profound impact on him. So I'm going to share a little bit about that. But gratitude is one of those things that gives you the ability to kind of break through whatever the dark cloud is that you're dealing with, right? We talk about in marriages, right? We put so much, sometimes when we're really fighting a lot, we're putting a lot of negative energy into the marriage, the ball and chains, all he wants is sex. It's just this constant negativity that we're throwing back and forth to each other that doesn't allow us to kind of fill that emotional bank account, so that when my husband might say or do something that hurts me, that I can bounce back. I'm like, oh, someone's having a bad day, but I'm choosing to have a good day, So here's this thing of gratitude and how it offers, but it certainly offers balance and hope for my clients. I'm really sorry this is so busy, but there's a really great book. You can see it here. It's called The Tools. It's written by Phil Stutz and Barry Michaels. And I think there's some really good podcasts on this as well if you just want to do the simple version. But there's three specific tools that he used that I really, really like. One is if you look at the very top here where you've got the black cloud, and that's how a lot of us have been feeling, or certainly when you're feeling anxious or depressed, it can feel like this black cloud is just kind of following you everywhere. And according to Phil Stutz, and he's got, I don't even know, he's been practicing for quite a time. When you allow yourself to really focus on what what you're grateful for, it actually gives you access to whatever your source is. Mine is God. Some people it's Allah. Some people it's Buddha. Some people it's just the nature, right? It's sun, to just fill ourselves with everything that's positive, to give us access to what our core competencies are, to shine with the things that we're able to do. We have to learn how to cut through that black crowd, and gratitude is the most simple way to do it. And those tips on the previous page are maybe something that can help you. String of pearls is another concept that I really like. The string of pearls is really all about taking small actions, or taking an action. It doesn't matter how small it is. And it's kind of fun. Yes, that does say little turd. If you're wondering if that's what that little statement is, because it's too small for you. But a string of pearls is that we wake up every day and our goal is to just string pearls, right? Sometimes stringing pearls is getting out of the bed and brushing our teeth, and that's all we can tolerate that day. But as long as we're getting up and saying forward motion, what other pearl can I add to the string so that I'm in perpetual motion? So I'm moving forward. And these little turds, as he says, these little black dots in the middle of those circles represent sometimes that things don't go as planned. It doesn't have to be perfect, that step, right? Maybe I took a shower and oops, I forgot to do my hair. So on with the day, it's okay. Or maybe this project that I did, it really wasn't my best. It was maybe 80%, but you still had forward motion, you still got it done, you still turned it in. It's less about the outcome and more about the movement of getting things done. And it's also about recognizing that sometimes when those things that happen that aren't good, they're just as valuable to us because they're meant to teach us something. Sometimes those little turds are meant to teach us something. So I love this notion of the string of pearls. And again, you can read all about it in the book or listen to it on podcast. And then this last one is another one that I really like that is called the reversal of desire, which is, so many times, if you look at that picture down in the bottom left-hand side here, I guess if I'm to point, oops, I'm opposite. Oh, I'm in the way. Oh, shoot. Hold on. Okay, there it is. So this one, I'm going to step off a little bit so you can see it. This one talks about that we get in a comfort zone in our where we are today, right? It means that we avoid things like pain with at the most energy that we can muster to do it. And that keeps us in what we call the comfort zone. If you really want to be able to get past to where there are endless opportunities, you have to learn to tolerate pain. I've always often told people that my subtitle for my name should be, Susan McCormick. I help clients get comfortable being uncomfortable. Like that's my job. I teach people how to tolerate pain, because when they're willing to tolerate pain, when I say magnificent things can happen, that is an understatement. Infinite possibilities present them to you. You activate your creative sense, your innovative sense, your connection to others, like everything's better. But because we're all so afraid of pain, and many of that is because, let's face it, parents, we try to make things really easy for our kids. We don't like them to experience pain, so we took it for them. And so we've got to let people experience pain. It's where the most profound lessons in life will come. And if you're willing to go through that pain, right? And there's some exercises on how to do it. He calls it the reversal of desire. He basically says if there's something that you're doing that you're kind of afraid of, like I'm getting ready to do a TEDx talk. There, I've put it out live. So now I'm going to have to do it, but I am preparing for it. And it's something that it scares the crap out of me, quite honestly. But I realized that I'm really trying to practice this. I kind of went into it. I'm like, what's the worst that can happen? And I allowed myself to sit in what's the worst of it. And I kind of went, the exercise is imagine yourself going in to a cloud of pain, and imagine yourself saying, bring it on, and just allowing yourself to just really sit with whatever that pain is about. and then deciding, almost imagining that cloud almost spits you out of it and you kind of come off and you dust yourself off and you're like, okay, I've done it. I'm not letting that control me. And now I'm moving forward, regardless of the fact that I could have that pain. Because I'm telling you, that notion of fear and pain is what's keeping us from doing what we want to do. And if you know me, you know that I'm a Mel Robbins lover. So she has a great book that's out. It's called The Let Them Theory. She's got a wonderful podcast. She also wrote the book, The 5 Second Rule, and she's got real practical skills on how to stay regulated when the people around you are completely dysregulated. Her kind of interesting commentary is that we're basically all a bunch of 8-year-olds running around. Because here's the deal, most of us experience trauma between your first working memory, let's say 4, 5, 6, well, probably 4 or 5. And then we figure out kind of who we are in life, how our family sees us, how our friends see us, how the world structures around us. And we get some what I call beliefs that just aren't really true. That we call them negative beliefs. And then when that happens, we start learning coping strategies. So starting around 4 or 5, we pretty much have all of our coping strategies figured out by the time we're like 15 or 16. How freaking scary is that, right? My 12-year-old is sometimes trying to solve my problems as a business leader. That's scary to me sometimes, So I have to learn how to regulate so that I'm making decisions from my adult 57-year-old instead of my 12-year-old that's having an emotional reaction. So her theory is basically this: when you have somebody around you that's acting in a way that is triggering to you, let them. The more that you try and control somebody else's reaction, you're just fighting an unwinnable battle, honestly. And you're just basically grabbing the ability to be dysregulated. So the let them theory is all about let them have whatever reaction they want to. And it doesn't mean to let them get away with it, right? It means that I'm going to let me decide to either get up and leave, to express, hey, this isn't working for me. I'll talk to you when you're more regulated, or decide it shouldn't matter to me what my friend from high school is posting on Facebook. It shouldn't, I don't even talk to her, for crying out loud. Why am I letting it get to me? It's learning to kind of release control and detach from external chaos. And then it provides you to have kind of empowerment of what you're able to do. It's kind of the tenets behind EMDR. I kind of laugh that this book is a really good read to teach you how to do EMDR, because EMDR is about staying within your sphere of influence. And I can only control my thoughts, my actions, my feelings, my reaction, all of that. The choice is only in me, for me. And when I try and do that for others and about others, ain't no good outcome coming from that, right? She's also got this notion of the 5 second rule, which is to interrupt what we call fear loops. I do it getting out of bed in the morning. Sometimes I'm not a morning person. I don't love getting out of bed in the morning. I'm just wanting more sleep. I'm so cozy and comfy. But I've kind of activated this notion of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and up I get, right? It's almost it's a pattern breaker, right? I'm in my mind thinking what I don't want to, how can I get away with it? I've got all these things. And just by doing that backward count, that 5 second rule, right? I'm able to act. And then once I'm out of bed, like things just start rolling for me, right? And so that's what this is about. And think about it. Like if you're jumping out of a plane, what do? 5, 4, 3, and you just jump. You're getting into a cold body of water. We always count backwards. Our body is programmed to act when you give it a countdown. Okay, so here's just some practices, right? To kind of summarize what we talked about. Limit the consumption, right? Ground through breath, movement, and nature. Oh my gosh, they can look at the brain. Like if my husband and I could go walking on a treadmill at the YMCA in Seneca, South Carolina, and our body's going to get some good benefit from that, but we take that walk and we go on a hike in nature where there's trees and foliage and nature and waterfalls. Like our central nervous system is so grounded and regulated. I want you to connect with people that are safe. And I want you to help create some structure and routine so that you're focused on regulation. And then if none of these things are working, clearly give us a call. We've got the tools here. We know how to help you guys through this. And then just really, here's what we know. Uncertainty is inevitable, but dysregulation doesn't have to be. And most of us feel like we have zero control over it. Well, I'm here to tell you that you have more control than you probably know. You just haven't learned to do it. Maybe you were never taught it. We have this notion of what our parents taught us versus what we observed in others, and we just don't know how to take back control within our own regulation system. And when we understand that how our brain is and how it gets triggered, you're actually gaining power. And my goal, I want to be in a world that is about healing and about creating radical acts that allow us to be grounded. That is my goal. That is my contribution. When I'm looking at what's happening and what I want to offer, that's what I want to offer. I want to help people learn to regulate so we can collectively figure out how to have some level of balance where we're kind of in the middle and that we're moving forward. So that's it for my presentation. I didn't leave much time for Q&A, but I'll stay longer if you want to. So let me get rid of the sharing. Okay. And let's just see, I see one Q&A. Does the numbing cause issues with sleep? Absolutely, Miss Ali. When the brain is in a dysregulated state and we are numbing, right, it has an effect. Again, it doesn't allow, so our body naturally creates certain hormones that allow us to sleep. When you are numbing and you're not dealing with emotions and you're not learning how to regulate, well, then your body is staying in that perpetual fight or flight, perpetually. And when you're in fight or flight, your body releases cortisol and adrenaline. So it's like asking somebody who's running a race to stop and take a nap. It doesn't work. Your body's like, no, I got to keep going because I'm in danger. There's a threat, an imminent threat, and I've got to get out of the way. So our body can't calm. So numbing, it does is prolong, or I'm sorry, it not prolongs. Numbing doesn't allow us to regulate. It gets in the way. It creates that noise between us and a regulated state. Okay, next question. What do you do when you feel like you've tried all these things, but nothing is working? Great question. My suggestion for the people that tell me this is that maybe you have some trauma that you've never focused on, or maybe you did, but you're noticing that your body is still not regulated. We have tools. There's some somatic types of therapy practices that we can teach. There is also a modality called EMDR that you heard me talk about. So what we need to find out is that this is a loaded question that's very hard for me to answer in this context, but I have a million questions into my head about what have you tried? Why didn't it work? So oftentimes in therapy, I'm going to give somebody a tool and they're going to come home and say, it didn't work. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me what you did, how you did it. And then we realize sometimes the way that they're executing it might have just a little teeny tiny nuance that is needed so that it can be more effective. And that's part of what therapy is about. I would also recommend, gosh, there's so many good podcasts out there. Healing Trauma is out there. Oh my God, Gabor Mate is a really wonderful guy that talks about this as well. So I would say educate yourself on trauma and see if you see yourself in there. And if you do and you've never done anything about it, call us because we can help. How do you regulate periodic fight and flight mode? So if I'm reading this correctly, it's not like you're there all the time, but when it shows up, I'd go back to that slide that I shared, which is deep breathing, usually regulates that for me. Going for a walk. We used to do this in my house when you're really angry, and we're Irish, so we can get fiery in my family. When that happens, we'd grab a dog and go for a walk because believe it or not, walking is bilateral stimulation, because so tapping is to wake up that left brain. Walking is bilateral stimulation. You're walking and journaling, right to left. Your eyes are going left to right as you're writing. That is why those types of things are meant to help with regulation. It also means that trying to identify what is the cause that got you into fight or flight and then decide, put it in the container. Say, I don't like how I'm feeling right now. I'm going to put this away. I'm going to go away. I'm going to bake a cake. Or I'm going to go sit with a friend and we're going to laugh and say, we're not talking about certain things today because I want to feel light and I want to feel good. And I've got to feed my body some good energy. Okay. The next one, how do you handle when I've separated myself from, okay. How do I handle when I've separated myself from talking about stressful topics, but those around me haven't, and they want to talk about it? Oh my gosh. Anonymous attendee, I feel you, sister or brother. I don't know. I can't tell the sex by this one, but wow. Well, what I've learned is that, I mean, gosh, the holidays can do this. It is, and I tell my clients to do this all the time. When I know I'm there with, if they or if I'm going into a situation that I know I could potentially get triggered by, I make sure that I go in there pretty regulated. Either, and I've taught people when they're going to take a test to go get to the test a half an hour early, and I teach them how to tap. I teach them how to activate, right? Those things like serotonin and dopamine and neuroepinephrine, those things that calm the body by you doing some of these things before you walk into that situation. It's going to allow people to say things and for you to say, it's kind of like putting on a bubble suit. It's like they say something and it goes, whoop, and it falls off. Because here's the thing, we're not going to convince other people, especially if, again, we just talked about just personality traits that are different. Like, I'm not going to convince somebody to be more carefree. And they're not going to convince me that structured is the way to go because I'm just not wired for that. I feel super anxious when that happens to me. So I think it's to start with, it's not our job to convince people what's right or wrong. Number one, regulate before you go in and learn to put on your bubble suit so that when something happens, it hits you and it goes, bloop, it just falls off. Next one, what role does trauma play in the body's ability to regulate? What role does trauma play in the body's ability to regulate? And how can we begin with restore the balance? Okay. Well, trauma is rooted in when it happens to you. Oftentimes we have what we call a negative belief, oh, period. I don't have to add more to that. What that means is that, let's just say that, let me try and get an example here. That you grow up in a family where your father was incredibly abusive and he said to you all the time, you're never going to amount to anything. You're a POS. If you don't know what that means, I'll tell you later. You're stupid. That's what we would consider that trauma. That's kind of what we call very emotionally kind of charged, and it makes people feel like crap. So that's what we call trauma. Right? And you have a belief system of, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe everyone does think I'm dumb. Maybe I am never going to amount to anything. That's a negative belief system. And then over time, this is the really sad thing that happens. We go through life and we start collecting data that supports that negative belief system. So I'm not good enough. And then I go to first grade and I get my first C on a spelling test. And my teacher's like, good luck next time. And we take that little piece of information and it makes this negative belief that's a pinhole, it makes it bigger. And then we get into high school and, Johnny Smith breaks up with me and tells me that he prefers my best friend. And boy, that might really get bigger then. And all through life, we start collecting data that makes that negative belief appear true. And when we believe that, we tend to see the life through that. So when you get married, you're going to always think that your husband doesn't think you're good enough, even though he probably does. He married you, for crying out loud. But you might think it's just a matter of time before he figures out I'm not good enough. So that's how trauma plays a role. It gives you a continual cycle of a belief system that's completely false. It's completely false. And that your coping strategies are basically the age you were when your dad first told you that you were a POS. Okay, so that means in your marriage, your 5-year-old comes out and tries to help you problem solve. It doesn't work. So that's how trauma plays a role. It's in your thoughts. It's what your coping strategies are. And it usually keeps your system at a very highly charged space. You're always waiting for someone to make that belief system true. It's almost like, what it goes back to the law of attraction. What you put into this world comes back to you in equal or greater force. So you're creating this cycle of the very thing that you don't want. So how do you begin to restore that balance? I think we've talked about it, right? It starts with one, being aware of it. Actually journal how many times you say bad crap about yourself. Seriously, just how many times you do that. And then you're going to notice, holy moly, I do this a lot. And then, hopefully if you're not able to use the tools that we've given you to regulate, call us. We are very competent at helping you identify that so that we can help your body heal, so that you kind of have that kind of freedom. I always say when you do EMDR, it's like dropping a cloak of just emotional baggage. It's like we all show up to our marriages with these big suitcases of emotional baggage and we just set it down. And EMDR and therapy and all those types of things, it's almost like you're dropping those suitcases of emotional baggage and you're walking away from them. And you walk away from them with the lessons learned, thankfully, your brain can retain that, but you have to make a conscious decision to say, I choose not to carry this emotional baggage anymore, and I move forward with freedom, right? So that's the whole purpose there. Okay, how do I say that? Okay, let's see. Sorry, I'm trying. These are good questions. Okay, I think, wow. And we have a minute to spare, Kristen. Look at us.
I think, yeah, I think that was fantastic. I learned a lot from that, and I know that the chat was going to and the questions. So thank you so much for sharing all of that information. I think for me, I learned a lot about regulation and trauma and how it really affects us in our everyday life. Wow. So one thing I wanted to mention is that next month we are going to have our next webinar, which is going to be on play therapy. And we have a registered play therapist in our clinic here that does Emily House, and she's going to be leading that on how it's a great tool for healing and for growth, especially for the kiddos, right? That don't want to maybe talk about their problems but are struggling. So play therapy can be a really great tool. Do you want to say anything more about that, or?
No, that's just our commitment to you guys, right? Like we're trying to give you a taste of what we do here because therapy can be really overwhelming for people. Like they're like, "Well, I don't want to go in and, blah, either throw up and say all my dirty laundry that I've had in my life." But really, doing that sets you free. Holding on to it without processing it, it holds you captive. It makes you unregulated. It gives you these big reactions, right? And so we want people to recognize that there's not a one size fits all here. We do everything from talk therapy to play to art to energy to, I mean, we're just really trying to open up lots of different options for people. But I will tell you that art and play, I use it with adults. So don't feel like, oh, that's just for little kids. No, no. I do like sand tray and art therapy with a lot of my clients because when you're in a creative space, it activates your subconscious. Guess where all of our trauma is stored? In your subconscious. So that's why music makes you cry, why art can make you really contemplative, right? Like there's a reason that the arts are very healing. So it'd be a great opportunity for you guys to learn a little bit about how that affects the brain and what we do here to support that.
Excellent. All right, so that's coming up on May 9th, and at 12 o'clock, we'll be sending this recording out to everyone with reminders on how to sign up for that as well. But thank you again, Susan, for sharing your wealth of knowledge on how to make us all happier and healthier.
My privilege. I love it. I love what I do here. So thank you guys for listening.
All right, bye-bye.